Bloody Point speaks to the massacre of the Amerindians, the Kalinago people, after they were the victims of a preemptory strike on the part of the Europeans, the English, who had settled at their invitation. In fact, they were welcomed by King Tegraman, who was king of the Amerindians. Some people say the Caribs. I try to avoid the use of the word Carib because of its association with cannibal, which is what the Europeans wanted to suggest, that these were cannibals, and therefore whatever they as Europeans who were civilized did to these cannibals was justified because they were only cannibals. So I avoid the word. But the fact that they had been long established, more so on the southern coast, along the southern coast of the island of St. Kitts, or the island of Lemuria, which is the name which they gave to it. Principally between the West Farm area right down to Old Road. But the confrontation took place at what came to be known as Bloody River, also referred to as Stone Fort River. And that's where the confrontation took place. But you will know that there are still relics of the Kalinago presence at the Stone Fort River and also at the Wingfield or Old Road, or the second, you might say, of the two rivers in Old Road. The Amerindians had been here for a long time, and they had developed their own way of life. They had their own form of government, if you will. They had their own religious ceremonies and symbols, and they lived consistent with the way in which the world was at that particular time. The English came along 1623, 1624, having, as I said before, been invited by King Tegraman to work alongside them. And not for the first time, once the Europeans enter a particular country, the people, the Aboriginal people, are wiped out, either by disease or by war. Because in many instances, the Aboriginal people do not have any kind of immunity to European diseases, and so many of them died off because of European diseases. Alternatively, you find that they wanted control of the land, the Europeans, and therefore they had to find a way of getting rid of the Amerindians so that they could own the land, which was considered to be far too valuable for these backward people, as they saw it. And so the story is that in 1626, 1627, the year is not particularly significant. The Europeans claim that they were told that the Europeans, would be attacked by the Amerindians, and before they were attacked, the British, and I think some French were also involved, attacked the Amerindians and chased them from the island. We know that they were extremely good seamen, that they made wonderful boats which traveled between St. Kitts and Dominica, where there was another Amerindian presence. Indeed, I think up to today there is still an Amerindian presence in the island of Dominica. And they sought to get reinforcements from Dominica, and this did not happen. But they resisted strenuously, and the story goes that their blood ran, it is said, for days, maybe a slight exaggeration, but their blood did run along the Stone Fort River, or Bloody Point River, as it came to be called. But what I think the National Trust is particularly interested in at this point is highlighting the writings, the markings, which are still visible on the cliff up the Stonefort River, some distance from the road. We are hoping that in time that site can be developed, because we do not think that enough attention has been paid to the contribution of the Amerindians to St. Kitts, nor is sufficient attention paid to the contribution which they made towards the development of the life and the developments which the Europeans brought about during the 1620s and 1630s. So I'm hoping that some effort will be made to highlight the contribution of the Amerindians. Suffice it to say that I was born in Challengers Village. Challengers Village adjoins Stonefort Estate. The only thing which separates Challengers Village from Stonefort Estate is the fact that there was a man named John Challenger who had some land between Stonefort Estate proper and the other estate at the other end, which is Toads. And Mr. Challenger decided that, as a matter of principle, he would sell or lease his lands to formerly enslaved people. And that, in fact, is the origin of Challengers Village. It was the first independent village in the sense that it was not estate land. It was land owned by Mr. Challenger, which he either sold or leased to individuals. And so from the very beginning, we're talking about 1840, 1841, right? This became an independent free village. And so the people of Challengers, the village from which I come, have always considered themselves to be in a very special position, because from the time of emancipation, they've been able to own a piece of land which was their own, and no estate manager or estate owner could tell them to remove themselves and remove their houses from estate land. So there's that kind of closeness, I would say, between Challengers Village and what used to be Amerindian territory. Now, we do not know how far east towards Bastille the Amerindians extended, because as you will recall, the Amerindians tended to live pretty close to waterside, river courses, because they were extremely clean as a people, and they used a lot of water in terms of their religious ceremonies and practices and so forth and so on. But who knows? It may well be that what is today Challengers Village might well have been Amerindian territory. Okay? But we are hoping that we'll be able to do some more delving into the history of these people and to give them the credit which they richly deserve. I would like to see more research being done into it, because we do not know enough about the Amerindian way of life. You know, obviously they practice agriculture, and the Europeans who were coming out from Europe did not know very much about tropical agriculture, and so they inherited a lot of the knowledge, a lot of the practices of the Amerindians, and in the end the Amerindians were obliterated so that the Europeans could take over. But to answer your question directly, I'd like to see much more research being done into it. And I'd also like to see the whole area, you know, being developed, so that you can have a road going to it. I certainly think so. Maybe not in isolation. The reason is that, as I said, I don't think we have given enough credit, you know, to the Caribs, as they used to be called, to the Amerindians, to the Kalinago people, in terms of the contribution which they've made to our way of life here. I mean, for example, what we know nowadays, we're hearing more and more about the use of cassava. Now, this is something which the Kalinago people developed to a very high degree, right? The way in which they lived, right? Their system of government, so to speak. The way in which they were able to keep their land more or less as a communal property as opposed to being owned by. There are lots of things we can learn from them. No, I'm not saying we can get back there, but certainly we need to know, in terms of going forward, what it was like then and what benefits perhaps you can derive from that situation. I don't feel any great sense of excitement about Christopher Columbus coming to the Caribbean. From a European perspective, it meant a lot to them because it was opening up a brand new world. But in terms of coming to the Caribbean and sailing past St. Kitts and naming it, as it were, from a distance, I really don't feel any great sense of excitement about that. The story goes that he put down anchor somewhere in the Old Road area, Old Road Stead it is called. There's no evidence that Christopher Columbus landed on any part of St. Kitts. And he's supposed to have given it his Christian name, and I suppose Kittitians should feel a sense of pride because he viewed St. Kitts as being special, as being specially beautiful, and as a consequence he gave it his own Christian name. That is one version. Another version is that when he looked at St. Kitts from the sea, he never landed, from the sea, he saw, presumably it was Mount Leamuga, previously called Mount Misery, and according to him it looked like, it suggested to him a picture of St. Christopher, the patron saint of travelers, carrying a baby on his back. There are different versions as to how St. Kitts got its name. But in terms of what impact Christopher Columbus had on St. Kitts, or even on the Caribbean, I'm not sure, because in terms of St. Kitts, as I've said before, he never landed here, and there's no particular reason why I personally should get excited about Christopher Columbus, 1492. That's my view. I don't feel a personal connection to Charles Fort per se, because Charles Fort predated Brimstone Hill. Because as you will recognize, St. Kitts was dotted by forts along the entire southern coast of the island. And so you had Charles Fort as well as Fort Charles. You had Fort Thomas. You had, what else? Stone Fort. Yeah. Right? You had a fort at what is now today Garvey's estate. Right? Fort Londonderry and Fort Pine. You had many, many, many forts. And so what happened is that when Fort Charles, or rather, okay. Yeah. When Charles Fort failed to provide the defense which the British had hoped it would provide, they then came up with this brilliant idea: why not develop Brimstone Hill? which is much, much higher. And that is how Brimstone Hill came about, starting way back in 1690. And all of this speaks to how valuable St. Kitts and these small islands, these small sugar islands or former sugar islands were to the British at that particular time. And so Brimstone Hill developed after Charles Fort had failed to. I am more fascinated, to be quite honest, with Brimstone Hill because of what it means to us as black people. Okay? I certainly think that we need to look at it from our perspective, not even in terms of what our ancestors suffered, but what they were able to achieve and to overcome. Because there's no question that many of the history books coming out of Europe gave us the impression that the African people were docile, the African people were dumb, and they were ignorant. And I'm saying that Brimstone Hill today is a contradiction, is evidence of the fact that our ancestors were strong, physically and emotionally and spiritually. Strong people. Think of what they overcame. They were skillful, because if Australia got among its early settlers people who were criminals in in England and who were sent there, they were transported there as a form of punishment, people who came to the Caribbean represented the strongest and the best of African stock, right? These were the young warriors. These were the people who were quite often captured against their will and who overcame all of the punishment and all of the hardship of the Middle Passage, etc., etc. And when they came here, they worked under conditions which were not intended to create conditions in which they would survive. So I'm saying they were strong, they were skillful, and they are the ones who built that beautiful, which is going on 400 years old, right? So I prefer to relate to that and to say, well, this is something which we should all look to and recognize that if the UNESCO has now said this is a World Heritage Site, it is because they've done all of their evaluation and they've come back to tell us, since we didn't know, that this is a wonderful work of art reminiscent of what black people can do when they're prepared to work together and overcome the negatives which are intended to keep them in a condition of enslavement. So I relate to that. Right? I relate to that. And it says to us today, especially to our young people, that listen, in modern historical times, black people have always been subject to one form of discrimination, brutality, etc. And they've overcome. And the message is that we must strive to overcome. Even though these days we are talking about reparations, I warn you, that is going to be a long struggle. Nobody need fool themselves into believing that the Europeans are going to be handing out millions or billions of pounds or euros to people in the Caribbean. It's going to be a long struggle. Well, I think that Brimstone Hill is committed to working along with the National Trust to develop Charles Fort. I would suggest much along the lines of Brimstone Hill itself. But this would obviously depend on the resources which Brimstone Hill can make available to Charles Fort. Because years ago one was able to depend on overseas organization donors who will make funds available. For example, there's still work to be done at Brimstone Hill, right? There's still work to be done. I mean, when it started 49 years ago, the society, it was with a view to restoring the fort. We have not yet been able to complete that work. And so we are saying to Charles Fort, sure, we are willing to work along with you. We are willing to assist in every way that we can. But this would have to depend on resources becoming available. Because, of course, we could not jeopardize our own situation and divert attention to Charles Fort. Okay? So once there's that understanding, I think we're going to do as much as we possibly can to see Charles Fort develop, because we believe that it can in fact be complementary, you know, to what we're doing at Brimstone Hill. Even Brimstone Hill has developed, as you call it, has developed as it is. We still want to do more, right? Depends on the community, right? And we hope that the community of Sandy Point can become more and more and more involved in the development of Charles Fort, and certainly also in the development of Brimstone Hill, right? All that we are doing is, I just wish we could get more of our people. It isn't for the leadership to be carrying the flag and talking about Brimstone Hill and talking about Charles Fort. Yes, they do that. But in my mind, more importantly is that process of empowerment, whereby the citizenry, you know, take ownership of it, recognize it as their own history and heritage, something which they feel a sense of pride in passing on to their children, something they feel a sense of pride in showing off to visitors, right? But we have to get our people involved. And I keep on lamenting the fact that our people are not sufficiently involved. Sometimes it starts with us as the adults, whether we are in the Department of Culture or we are teachers or what have you. We need to get our younger generation more involved, you know, by telling them more of our history, telling them how important heritage is to a country, not just for tourism purposes, but as part and parcel of their way of life, right? We need to know more about our ancestors, our African ancestors, right? Because so much that we learned from the English books made us feel that they're not worthy of study and they're not worthy of emulation. And the more we get to know about them, the more we recognize that we need to know more. We need to try to emulate them. The importance of family, right? The importance of community. This is something which Africans brought. They came from a society in which those two elements were extremely strong. And though they were not Christians, they had very strong religious faith. They were very spiritual people, which is why they survived all of the outrageous things which were done to them as a people. And as a consequence, many of them ended up saying, well, you may enslave the body, but you can't enslave the spirit, you can't enslave the soul, right? So in the end, when emancipation came, they recognized and they said to all the world that we had to concede, we had to give in to the superior force and the brutality of slavery, but we never surrendered to slavery. Right? That was the spirit. This is spirit which we want our people to know about, to try to develop and to try to emulate. Because if we have that spirit as a people, we will succeed.